Hello and welcome to the Satluj Podcast. It's universally accepted that the Viet Nam War was a grave mistake for the US, which led to the mighty nation's eventual defeat to what was seen as a much lesser enemy. One of the chief architects of that lost war was the US Secretary of Defense Robert S. McNamara. Now, McNamara brought a technocratic, data-driven approach to the war, but he later became its most famous internal critic, acknowledging that American leaders fundamentally misunderstood the conflict. His very public admissions of this after leaving office form the basis of enduring debates about leadership, moral responsibility, and how intelligent or so-called intelligent policymakers can preside over catastrophic failure. So how interesting then that McNamara's exact same mistakes in losing to Vietnam are being made almost identically by the mighty Indian regime when it comes to battling the Khalistan movement, and why inevitably, like the US, India will inevitably lose that war. Well, to talk about this, I'm joined today by a regular guest, Dr. Gurinder Singh Grewal, MD. Dr. Grewal, welcome. Thank you for joining us once again today.
Good morning, Angus. Waheguru Ji ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji ki Fateh. So, Robert McNamara, so we're going to talk about him. What we're talking is the power, intellect, and tragedy of Viet Nam. Robert McNamara was a highly intelligent, brilliant person who was a Ford Motor president. He attended Harvard Business School, and President Kennedy chose him to be the Secretary of Defense. So he was Secretary of Defense from 1961 to 1968, both for Kennedy and for President Johnson, until Johnson pushed him to World Bank in 1968, where he did a lot of good work in getting rid of poverty, etc. So recently, there have been two books before written. First one was in retrospect. That's Robert McNamara wrote with another author, Brian Van de Mark. The second one came, this was in 1995. The second one came in 2018, written by is called Road to Disaster by Brian Van de Mark, who was co-author in the first book. Recently, another book came, McNamara at War, A New History, by William Taubman and Philip Taubman, published in 2025, September 23rd. One of my friends introduced me to this book to read it, and I reviewed. And I thought we should talk about it because the lessons from these three books, what McNamara is admitting, what happened, how they failed, very pertinent to what's happening in Punjab and Kashmir. We'll talk that in the second half, but the first one, I think we will talk about what McNamara's reason for failure was. So according to this recent book, the thesis is that technocratic power fails disastrously even when its intelligence is disconnected from a historical perspective. So technocratic power fails disastrously when intelligence is disconnected from historical perspective, cultural empathy, and moral courage. McNamara exemplified how even brilliance and discipline can enable catastrophe if not grounded in moral and contextual wisdom. So there's two things come in this thesis, intellect and wisdom. So let's talk about the difference between intellect and wisdom. You know, they superficially looks interchangeable, but no, they are not interchangeable. Let's see what intellect is: the ability to think, analyze, calculate, reason, and process information. Concerned with logic and data, memory, argument, and technical skills. Often measurable IQ academic degree, technical competence. The wisdom is ability to use knowledge and experience for sound judgment, concerned with discernment, moral clarity, balance, and long-term consequences. Rooted in humanity, ethical grounding, and lived understanding. So, intellect and wisdom are not the same. Intellect is what you know, and wisdom is what you know when to use, when not to use it. Like in cardiology, we have a training, we can do a lot of complex procedures, open the arteries, do all that. But with experience, you have to learn and apply that technology with wisdom when to use, when it's going to be useful for the patient, when it's going to be harmful. So that is the example that I think I can give from my field. So let's see why the summary from these three books is very similar. So why McNamara failed? So McNamara failed means why US government or the policy failed. Core failure. McNamara consistently viewed Ho Chi Minh primarily as a communist agent, fatally underestimating the Vietnam's nationalism and anti-colonial identity. So they thought Ho Chi Minh is just another communist that they can eliminate, but did not understand his nationality feelings and anti-colonial identity. So number two, Cold War lens distorted reality. Vietnam was treated as a dominant in global ideology struggle rather than a local historical fight for independence. They misunderstood the war in Vietnam and they thought the French failed because they didn't have enough power or they didn't know how to fight. So the war was lost in interpreting the situation before the war was even started. So technocratic arrogance. McNamara believed complex human conflicts could be managed like corporations because he came from Ford Motor Company through systems analysis, metrics, and optimization. So, that's today technology teaches us, but everything is not based on this technology. Metrics replace meaning. Body counts, bombing tonnage, and sorties rates substituted for general political understanding and popular legitimacy. The things are more and more power, more and damage they cause will result in victory. False lessons from success. Apparent success in World War II analysis and Cuban Missile Crisis reinforce a dangerous belief in rational control and predictability. Failure to underestimate, failure to understand existential wars. So this is a very important. We'll discuss later how it applies to our situation. Failure to understand existential wars. McNamara assumes adversaries would respond to cost-benefit pressure, failing to grasp that national liberation movement accepts unlimited sacrifice. So liberation movements very similar to ours. People are willing to sacrifice their life and everything they have to preserve their pride and their nationalism. They misunderstood that. They thought more damage they cause, they can break them. Escalation as default response. When strategies failed, the response was more force, not reassessment, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of violence. More failure, more violence, more failure, more violence, carpet bombing, etc. We're familiar with those stories from young age. Private knowledge, public deception. By 1965, McNamara privately knew the war was unavailable, yet continued to publicly defend and escalate. So what he has learned, what he believed cannot be done, but he continued. Why did he continue? He felt loyalty over the truth. Across all three books, McNamara admits the loyalty to president and fear of undermining U.S. credibility outweighed moral responsibility. So he felt that even though he know he was going to fail, U.S. was going to fail, he felt like it will look like he betrayed the president's confidence and let down his country. So he continued. Failure to resign. Despite profound doubts, McNamara chose to stay in office, making silence an act of complicity rather than restraint. When he knew he was failing, he should have resigned or discussed with the president, but he continued. Suppression of dissent. He was considered one of the strongest Secretary of Defense. Decision-making circles discourage fundamental challenges, producing consensus without wisdom. So anybody who disagreed was suppressed, and which, was a mistake. Cultural blindness. Vietnam's history, colonial trauma, and national pride were poorly understood or dismissed as irrelevant. So they did not interpret the situation as they should have. Psychological collapse without action. Emotional anguish and moral injury emerged, but personal suffering did not translate into decisive moral action. So, yes, inside he felt very bad. He felt responsible, even though he doesn't say that in the book. He felt morally he was doing wrong thing, but he continued. Late confession without consequences. In retrospect and road to disaster, McNamara acknowledges grave errors, but only after the power had passed. So by the time damage was done, systemic, not personal failure. The tragedy was not one man's flaw alone, but a model of governance that rewards intelligence, loyalty, and control, while punishing humility, dissent, and moral courage. So, this is happening many places in the businesses or government level. The people who are having humility, dissent, and moral courage, they are being suppressed or not. Their viewpoint is rejected when that should be considered. So, in summary, we can say Vietnam failed not because America lacked power or intelligence, but because its leaders misunderstood nationalism, mistook data for truth, and chose loyalty over consciousness. So, in summary, these are the 15 points I alluded to why America failed, and McNamara, who was responsible for the Defense Department, he has discussed this in 3 books with the authors, and those are the conclusions.
So, Dr. Grewal, then, it's quite an interesting history, this, because basically, we all have a knowledge or a certain knowledge of the Vietnam War. We do know, as a big picture sort of idea, that the US effectively lost that war. And we saw it as a guerrilla war. We saw it as a war that this mighty nation with essentially limitless resources defeated by essentially just a guerrilla army. So what you're saying here then, basically, is that the whole strategy as enacted by the United States government, as essentially designed by McNamara, just approached this war completely wrongly. They didn't understand the war, and the fundamental misunderstanding was it wasn't a simple war like the Cold War or even the Second World War, which was simple wars of numbers, as in we have more, better, stronger troops than you, and therefore we will defeat you as long as we keep killing more of you than you kill of us. Instead, it was a different war, and this is where they failed. It was a war of ideology, that they believed that the enemy they were up against were fighting essentially a communist war. They were agents, proxy agents of the communist world. And in other words, it was a proxy war for the Cold War. But it wasn't that at all. It was actually a war of nationalism. It was a war of fighting for their independence. They were driven not by ideology of communism, but instead by a simple, basic human desire for autonomy, to drive this invader out of their land they were fighting for their own, essentially, sovereign nation.
Yeah, that is a good summary. He was a very smart guy. He applied his business knowledge to social situation for which he was not well equipped. So that I think resulted in disaster. So this the failure of Vietnam, why this happened, is can be applied to what is happening in Punjab and Kashmir. So we can say Punjab, but Punjab, Kashmir, similar situation. So let's see how can we compare this? India repeating the McNamara mistake in Punjab and Kashmir. So they are also misdiagnosing nationalism as ideology. Just as McNamara misread Ho Chi Minh primarily as a communist rather than a nationalist, India frames Sikh political assertions as terrorism or a foreign conspiracy instead of recognizing it as a political national grievances rooted in history. We talked many times what was promised before 47 and what was delivered after 47. They just felt like by force they can deny the aspirations of a Sikh nation, but it's not happening. Ideological lens override ground reality. Cold War anti-communism blinded the US and Vietnam. Similarly, hyper-nationalist ideology, the RS ideology, today blinds India and Punjab, crowding out constitutional, historical, and federal perspective. They are missing the big picture, but just trying to make everybody Hindutva ideology, which is not going to happen. Force substitute for legitimacy. McNamara believed calibrated violence would compel compliance. So McNamara believed calibrated violence would compel compliance. So similarly, this BJP government and their ideologists and their people like their security advisor, India similarly relies on policing, surveillance, arrests, and security laws instead of rebuilding political legitimacy and trust. So they are following what McNamara did and failed, and they're trying to do this. That's what Ajit Doval does. They have occupied 50 kilometers of Punjab along the border by the Indian security department, and they control that rather than the local police. So same mistake, and we'll have the same results. Metrics replace meaning. Body counts and bombing statistics create an illusion of success in Vietnam. In Punjab, arrests, ban, intelligence, neutralization, and extradition requests are treated as a victory metric, while grievances persist. So they are misinterpreting, they are considering silence by oppression as a success. Escalation become the only tool. When Vietnam policies failed, Washington escalated. When Punjab policies failed, New Delhi tightens control. Like I mentioned, 50 kilometers of Punjab along the border is a police state. More laws, national security things like Amrit Pal is arrested and no trial. More surveillance. Now they want to control the cell phones, and before the Pegasus had controlled the political leaders. More oppression without strategic reassessment. So they are on this train of one thought process, which is using intellect instead of wisdom, ignoring existential identity conflicts. McNamara assumed rational cost-benefit logic would prevail. India similarly ignores that identity-based movement accept high costs when dignity, memory, and political recognitions are at stake. So this is what is happening. They have a 600 or 700,000 soldiers in Kashmir, but they're not able to control the Kashmir. They are misunderstanding their rational. The people can accept a lot of sacrifice when it's a question of their dignity, memory, and political recognition, let's say. Same situation in Punjab. I think we can also see similar situation in Ukraine. Putin is not understanding how come Ukraine is still fighting. They thought they'll be done in a few months. Next is suppression of dissent creates a false consensus. Vietnam decision making silence internal critics. In India, similarly, journalists, academic activists, and diaspora voices on Punjab are marginalized or criminalized, producing compliance, not solutions. Like they have killed Mr. Niger in Surrey, they killed Mr. Khanda in England, and they tried to kill Gurpalwan Singh Pannu. They want to silence the dissent, but not trying to understand the problem and look into the solutions. Private awareness, public denial. McNamara knew the war was failing, but defended it publicly to protect credibility. India continues hardline policy despite, because of evidence, the question has not resolved Sikh political demands. They understand they have not solved all the problem, but they every day try to find more repression. Now, Mr. Modi was in Punjab on the weekend. He's trying to use this caste-based politics to divide people in Punjab so BJP can win the next election. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. The message of Guru Nanak against the caste system is still alive. Yes, he will have some success, but he will not be able to achieve what he wants. Private awareness, public denial. McNamara knew the war was failing, but defended publicly to protect credibility. So this is the same thing we have just said. They are doing the same thing in India. Transnational oppression internationalize the conflict. US expand Vietnam and lost global moral authority. India's pursuit of Sikh activists abroad exports the Punjab conflict, damages democratic credibility, and alienates the Sikh diaspora. So this is the problem that they have created, and the Sikhs now, Sikh referendum has shown how they have damaged the Sikh psyche, and the majority, I would say most of the Sikhs, or almost the Sikhs, are in favor of independent Sikh homeland we call Khalistan. So they're not understanding, just because some people are not talking, they think they are not supporting it. Stability mistaken for resolution. Vietnam appeared stable until it collapsed. Punjab may appear controlled, but unresolved political grievances mean stability is enforced, not durable. Silence is not success. So, bottom line lesson. McNamara teaches that state fails when they confuse control with legitimacy and silence with peace. India risks repeating that failure in Punjab by treating a political identity problem as a security problem. So the conclusion of India's war on Sikhs will be the same. India will fail. Sikhs will survive like Vietnam did. So I think the lessons can be learned, but sometimes the arrogance stops people from taking the right action, or they don't like the failure, like McNamara did not want to publicly admit, knowing what he was doing was not going to be successful. So I think that this is the conclusion. We can apply this McNamara as a failure to current situation in Punjab, and I think the writing is on the wall. The result is going to be very much the same.
So the key parallel, Dr. Grewal, to McNamara's mistakes in Vietnam, to today's India, and indeed India over the last few decades, is that the US at the time were not fighting just a physical force, a physical enemy. They were fighting an ideology. Likewise, in modern-day India, and indeed since 1947, the Indian state has not been fighting simply a physical enemy, it has been fighting an ideology. And as we know, you cannot defeat ideologies. History has proven over and over again, you can't defeat an ideology. It's too vague, it's too nefarious, it is not something tangible that you can defeat. And therefore, would you think then that this ideology that India thinks it has defeated, just through sheer brute force and violence, particularly in the 80s and 90s, that same ideology hasn't gone away. They haven't defeated it. They might think they have, but they have not defeated it. Instead, it's evolved into something different. It's gone from a physical force that was apparent in self-defense during the 80s and 90s in terms of a militant campaign. It's now evolved and morphed into a democratic, peaceful movement. But the ideology, the ideological core remains exactly today as it always has been, probably arguably since the Sikh Empire. That ideology, that core of ideology still remains not just as strong today as earlier last century, but is actually stronger. And ironically, do you think the actions of the Indian state, these same mistakes as the US did in Vietnam, these mistakes that the Indian state are making have actually strengthened the cause for Khalistan and therefore, ironically, will help bring it about?
Yeah, very same situation in India. Like anybody who tried to come up with any discussion on solutions, even in the parliament, the people who disagree with Modi, they are suspended from the session, or they are suspended as a membership. Like Rahul Gandhi was once suspended, lost his membership in the parliament. So no discussion, no debate, and no dissent, no different opinion to discuss how the problem solving. The loyalty of Home Minister, loyalty of G. Doval and all the corrupt people is considered to be solution. So they will go down in history, but they will also hurt their country, and they will be held responsible for breakup of this country. And I think writing is on the wall. They cannot succeed. They cannot succeed. So while we discuss this, let me just change the subject just for a moment. We talked last time about the India's economy. So let me say a few words for our listeners of Satluj TV and the people who watch it. The India introduced their budget on Sunday. So India got freedom in 1947 and China got freedom in 1949. India's budget for this year is, we're talking in dollars because that's easier to understand, $583 billion. 37% of that will go to pay interest, and that money will be borrowed. So compare for 1.4 billion people. So that is a very small amount of per capita spending in the country. Look, for comparison, China. China became free 2 years later. Their budget is $4,200 billion, 7 times more than India. China's budget for defense is more than India's total budget. Why there is nobody thinking in India what is happening there? Why is India poor? Because they suppress people on the caste basis, people who are intelligent, people who can contribute, people who can invent things. They are not allowed to be part of society at the same level as a high caste people, whether they have capability or not. So this is the basic problem. That's why India is poor. They do not want to give equality. They don't want people to progress. So I give you one more example. Uh, I think many people do not know this, but there's a book by Ambedkar, My Thoughts on Pakistan, where he provided the structure, how the India will be divided and all that. So in that, he is talking about what will be the effect of this partition where they divide Punjab and Bengal on Hindus and what will be the effect on Muslims. So I just want to bring out one fact that he quoted. He wrote, I'm just quoting it. According to him, why Hindus were opposing Pakistan, this is his conclusion, because in Bangladesh and Punjab, all the high-paying, higher jobs was controlled by high class or Brahmanism or higher class Hindus. And they did not want to lose their jobs, even though they understood that 90% of the Muslim nation wanted to separate. So the people who have a control sometimes try not to rationalize or understand. So I think these are some of the lessons to be learned. People's aspiration, their nationality, and their willing to sacrifice cannot be controlled with killing and oppression alone.
Indeed, a fascinating discussion. I think it's just worth reiterating that statistic that you made there, Dr. Grewal, that China now, simply a nation that is approximately the same age as India, China now spends more on its defence than India does in its entire annual budget. I think that speaks volumes. But there, we must leave it.
How are they going to fight? How are they going to fight China? And I think this is if anybody from US politics is listening, they should also stop putting their money on a losing horse. They shouldn't bet on the losing horse. They're trying to see if India will be their partner against China if there's a war. India cannot deliver that, because look at how weak they are.
And again, another argument to break it up into its constituent parts, so it may actually be able to defend itself perhaps much better. But there we must leave it. Thanks so much again, Dr. Grewal, and we will continue our discussion soon. But Dr. Grewal, thanks once again for joining us.
Thank you, Angus. Very good also. Very good for that.
And thank you for watching the Satluj TV podcast. We will see you again next time.
Thank you.